So my name is Mark Furniss. I work for an organization called Veritas. As it will become immediately apparent, I am not a scientist during the course of my discussion. I'm in fact a recovering coffee trader. I worked for a company called Volcafe for just over 20 years. And in 2018, I switched over to Veritas, which is a non-profit organization focused on responsible sourcing in the coffee sector and also the cocoa sector. And we were founded in 2017 as a startup, an NGO startup. And really we were founded to address some of the perceived shortcomings in certification, in responsible sourcing and the way that was being handled in the coffee sector. I'll give you a very, very brief overview of what we do. It'll take a minute or two. We essentially have a code of conduct which will be familiar to anybody involved in sustainability. There was no new thinking here. We didn't need to fix this. It was rooted in ILO conventions and UN treaties and the consensus of civil society opinion on what mattered in sustainability, social, environmental, economic. We also look at demographic and agricultural and agronomic factors. You'll notice that deforestation is one of those factors that we were looking at, one of 30. It was the consensus of civil society opinion on what mattered in deforestation, things like, has a protected area been degraded or cut down in the last 15 or 20 years? If there has been conversion to coffee, has it been done legally or illegally? That was generally the type of definition of deforestation that we were finding in the civil society's course of work. What we didn't really find was being done correctly in certification was the way that those codes of conduct were being assessed. We found that a lot of farmers were being excluded from the assessment because a lot of the certified farmers would be along the main roads, conveniently situated to the trading centres, but as soon as you went outside of that narrow area, farmers weren't getting to become part of certified supply chains. So when they were inconveniently located, when they were along a rutted road 10 or 15 kilometers back from the trading center, those farmers really weren't getting to participate in the system. So what we did was we said, well, if you don't have a stable supply chain, if you don't have, if you're trying to include all the farmers in the country, including farmers that may not sell every year to the same trader, to the same roaster, to the same consumer, how do you establish a population to be sampled? So we used a different approach. We used a satellite scan of the country, such that we had an algorithm that identified where rural households next to coffee fields were. And then we took a sample of those. And that sample formed the basis of our assessment of the conditions under which coffee was being produced. To give you a sense of the scale that we do that on, this year we'll do 144,000 in-person farmer interviews across the coffee world. And when I say across the coffee world, I mean that. We're in 35 countries this year, and we go annually during harvest, unannounced visits, and totally anonymized. So we try and remove all the conflicts of interest, we try and reach all the farmers, and we cope with any level of traceability within the supply chain. That covers the first part of our system, which is the compliance. What are the conditions under which coffee is being produced? We then map that to roasters' actual supply chains through a supply mapping process. And then we challenge roasters to do something about the issues that we identify, be that child labour, banned pesticide use, minimum wage violation, etc. We have been relatively successful over the last few years. We did become the largest responsible sourcing scheme in coffee as of last year, and we continue that trajectory this year. Largely under the radar. We're not a consumer-facing brand. We work with companies to assess their supply chains and then assess their response to that. And if they pass those barriers, those bars, then we award them a responsible sourcing claim. We are a non-profit. We're a 501(c)(3) US-based non-profit. And some of the companies we work with will be familiar names to many people in the room. I won't dwell on that. I will more quickly move on to this, which is the EUDR, and this is specifically the definition of forest under EUDR, which is fundamentally different from the definition of forest that civil society really was working with up until this point. So the half hectare, any deforestation since the 31st of December 2020, 5 metre canopy height, 10% canopy cover, which is actually quite sparse forest. And we felt there wasn't much deforestation in the coffee world from our 144,000 surveys. We weren't coming across much deforestation and conversion to coffee, but we couldn't prove that based on this definition. We didn't have the data for that. So we started to look around to see, well, does somebody else have this data? Is this readily available? And this is probably the map that the EU had in mind when it chose to include coffee in the legislation. This is Global Forest Watch, created by WRI, World Resources Institute. And it's a fairly simple proposition. There is tree cover and there's tree cover loss. And the pink on the map is a tree cover loss. And you can start to see the intersection between tree cover loss in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and countries that produce coffee. And based on this analysis, I think there was a statistic that 7% of world deforestation was caused by coffee. We felt that was high, but we couldn't put any data to prove otherwise. And so that meant that the coffee was included in the legislation. When you zoom in on Global Forest Watch, this is what you'll see. You'll see an area of coffee production. The map in the background is a rather granular 0.5 meter resolution map, 0.5 meter satellite imagery. And then on the foreground, you'll see a slightly more pixelated layer, which is the deforestation layer. The reason that's more pixelated is that WRI, or World Forest, they use the 30 meter resolution data set from the Hansen data set. It's a Landsat satellite system, and each of those pixels is 30 by 30 meter. So the background map is half meter resolution, and the deforestation layer is 30 meter resolution. Now, the EU's premise is quite simple. You locate on the map where your coffee farms are. The farmers record their geolocations. They pass that up the supply chain. Eventually, when it comes to the EU, you can check when any of those geolocations are underneath a pink pixel. If it is, that coffee is banned from entry. If it's not, then that's fine. You can place that coffee on the market. So in order to make that decision, there's actually three things you need to be able to answer. Is the plot of land where the coffee is being produced, was it forest on the 31st of December 2020? Or was it existing agricultural use? Was it a tree crop, for instance? If it was forest, has it been subsequently deforested? And if it has been deforested, is your crop planted on that piece of land? And is it mature enough to export to the EU? Because it's not a prohibition on deforestation. It's a prohibition on the importation of 7 commodities grown on deforested land. So that first question, was it forest or was it tree crop? And this is probably the most important one. That is a satellite image at 30 meter by 30 meter resolution of a forest and of tree crop. Half of that image is forest and half of that image is tree crop. And I'll give you a moment to tell me which one's which. And bear in mind, 4% of your annual revenue depends on you getting this answer correct, if you're an EU operator. And what you'll notice very quickly is that it's very hard, either visually and importantly algorithmically, to determine which of those pieces of the image is tree crop and which one is forest. So the EU recommends in the legislation, but it doesn't require that you move to 10 meter resolution imagery, the Copernicus and Sentinel EU satellite systems, to determine tree crop or forest. So that is now the same image at 10 meter resolution imagery. And again, each of those 30 meter pixels now has 9 pixels inside it, so you've got more information, more data, but it's still inadequate, either visually or algorithmically, to determine which part of that image is tree crop and which is forest. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we realized that in order to answer that question, that absolutely crucial question, we were going to have to go to the half meter imagery. It's still a little blurry, but now you can see that the delineation between, on the right, in this case, forest, on the left, palm oil. So that is what we based our system on, is the half meter resolution. The reason most other systems will be based on the 10 and the 30 meter resolution is a very simple one, that is freely available. It's no cost. The half meter is rather expensive. So the second question, now you've determined if it was forest or tree crop. you now need to determine whether it was subsequently deforested or not. So this is a coffee plantation in Dak Nong in Vietnam. The image on the left is 2021. The image on the right is 2023. And you can see that something happened. I would suggest that it's probably a skeletal pruning or some sort of heavy rejuvenation. But what the satellite image you can see quite clearly is something green turned brown. And that's what the 30 and 10 meter resolutions are quite good at detecting large-scale deforestation. They've been extremely useful in places like the Amazon, detecting large-scale deforestation. But the question being asked by the EUDR is rather small-scale. And the problem with using those systems is then you get what's called false positives. So in this case, Global Forest Watch has identified that as a potential deforestation area and has flagged it as deforestation. It's underneath a pink pixel. So that is a false positive. A farmer may then be prevented from exporting that coffee to the EU, not because he's non-compliant, but because he can't prove he's compliant. And with 12.4 million smallholder farmers, you can see the complexity this might start to introduce. So the third question, if it was deforested and it was, then what crop is planted on that land? And this is where we really understood that the half-meter imagery was absolutely unavoidable. This is typically the task that ag tech has been doing for the last 10 years or so on crop detection. It is things like corn in Iowa or palm oil. These are monocrops. There's no canopy cover. There's delineated crop boundaries. It's a relatively straightforward task. But when we're talking about coffee and cocoa and rubber and forest in the tropics, these are the types of images we're having to make that determination on. And that's if I gave you the half meter. If I gave you the 10 meter resolution, it looked like that. And then you're asked to say, is that coffee or is that tree crop? In order to make that determination on what is coffee, cocoa, rubber, forest, not only do you need that half meter resolution, you need two more things. You need an extremely good deep learning AI model, which is something we've been working on for 7 years for our day job as responsible sourcing. And you need ground truthing, because a machine learning model can't learn unless you tell it where it got it wrong and where it got it right. And once you have those two things, you can start to make that determination based on an algorithmic AI model. The ground truthing should not be underestimated. We rebuild the model for every country, such that, because we realize that coffee looks different in Papua New Guinea to Ethiopia to Brazil. And in order to do that, we go through several steps, which I won't go into now for the sake of time, but it involves archetyping the crops in those countries, reviewing them with data labelers, and then ground truthing, sending people onto the ground to then tell the model where it was right, where it was wrong, whether it's abandoned coffee, coffee intercrop with cashew nuts, young coffee or cassava, and it starts to build up that training data set to be able to make the determination. The output of the model then, and I'll a couple more slides here. So this is Dak Nong. This is probably one of the most intense coffee producing regions in the world. It's in the central highlands of Vietnam. And you can tell by eyeballing the Google Earth picture that it looks agricultural. You can start to see crop boundaries. You can see perhaps some forest in the south. There's a town, a reservoir for irrigation, but it looks pretty agricultural. This should not be not easily confused with forest. When we run the model over this area, the blue is coffee. The red is rubber. There's some rice along the river boundaries in purple, and indeed some forest in the south. There has been some incursion into the forest, as you can see. The red is rubber, a rubber plantation been established within that forest boundary. If that happened before 2020, all good. In this case, it did. There's actually a couple of coffee plantations in there as well, in blue. So you can start to see the granularity that half meter resolution is able to produce. And crucially, what it can now tell you is when a green pixel turns blue. There's a change model around this annually. When you look at this same area using the Tropical Moist Forest Map, which is one that's recommended by the JRC, the Joint Research Council of the EU, that is a layer that's recommended for forest detection. And again, I will remind you that green is forest. Those are false positives. Well, it's a conservative estimate of what is forest. But the problem there is that as soon as those farmers renovate, change crop, manage shade trees, etc., it's going to start to look like deforestation. And then looking at the same area through the 3-year lens on Global Forest Watch, you can already see the deforestation detection kicking in. So those are all false positives. This is not these are incorrectly identified as deforestation. I'll probably pause there. There's a lot more I could say on this topic, but I'm just conscious of time. I'm having a wrist tapped over there. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions on this.
Thank you, Mark.